The Black Death was one of the most devastating catastrophes in human history. A pandemic so powerful that it reshaped Europe forever. Striking in the mid-4th century, it arrived at a time when medieval society was already fragile, marked by famine, war, and poor living conditions. When the plague reached Europe around 1347, it spread with terrifying speed, killing millions and leaving behind a transformed continent. Its impact went far beyond death and disease, altering Europe's economy, religion, culture, science, and social structure in ways that still influence the modern world. The origins of the Black Death can be traced to Central Asia, where the bacterium Yersinia pestis circulated among rodent populations. Through expanding trade networks, particularly the Silk Road, the disease traveled westward. Merchant ships carrying grain, goods, rats, and fleas brought the plague to ports along the Mediterranean, including Messina, Genoa, and Venice. From there it spread rapidly inland, carried by traders, soldiers, and pilgrims. Europe's crowded cities, poor sanitation, and lack of medical knowledge created the perfect conditions for the disease to thrive. The symptoms of the Black Death were horrifying and often fatal within days. Victims experienced sudden fever, chills, vomiting, and intense weakness. Painful swellings known as buboes appeared in the groin, armpits, and neck, sometimes growing as large as apples. Dark blotches formed on the skin due to internal bleeding, giving the disease its name. In some cases, the plague infected the lungs, causing coughing and allowing it to spread directly from person to person through the air. Death came swiftly, often within 2 or 3 days of the first symptoms. The scale of death was unprecedented. Between 1347 and 1351, the Black Death killed an estimated 30 to 60% of Europe's population. Entire villages were wiped off the map, leaving behind empty houses, untended fields, and silent churches. In cities, the dead piled up faster than they could be buried. Mass graves became common, and funeral rites were abandoned as fear overwhelmed compassion. Survivors lived in constant terror, unsure who would be next to fall ill. This massive loss of life shattered the foundations of medieval society. Before the plague, Europe was dominated by feudalism, a rigid system in which peasants worked the land for nobles in exchange for protection. The Black Death changed this balance of power overnight. With so many laborers dead, surviving peasants became scarce and valuable. Landowners struggled to maintain their estates and were forced to offer higher wages, better conditions, or even freedom to attract workers. For the first time, ordinary people had leverage over the elite. As a result, the feudal system began to weaken. Many peasants left their villages in search of better opportunities, something that had previously been forbidden. Governments attempted to control wages and restrict movement through laws, but these efforts largely failed. Over time, this shift contributed to the rise of a new middle class of merchants, artisans, and skilled laborers. Wealth slowly became less dependent on noble birth and more connected to trade and skill, reshaping Europe's economic structure. The Black Death also had a profound impact on religion and belief. In medieval Europe, the Church was the central authority in daily life, offering explanations for suffering and promises of salvation. When the plague struck, people turned to prayer, processions, and rituals, hoping for divine protection. Yet the disease spared no one, not priests, monks, or even high-ranking church officials. Many clergy died while caring for the sick, leaving communities spiritually leaderless. As the plague continued, faith was shaken. Some believed the Black Death was God's punishment for humanity's sins, leading to extreme religious movements such as the flagellants, who publicly whipped themselves in acts of penance. Others lost faith entirely, questioning how a just and merciful God could allow such suffering. This crisis of belief weakened the Church's authority, and encouraged people to seek explanations beyond traditional religious doctrine. Medical knowledge in the Middle Ages was largely based on ancient theories, superstition, and religious ideas. Doctors believed illness was caused by imbalances in bodily fluids, bad air, or planetary alignment. Treatments such as bloodletting, herbal remedies, and prayers proved useless against the plague. The failure of medieval medicine exposed its limitations and highlighted the need for new approaches to understanding disease. Despite the widespread confusion, the Black Death led to important developments in public health. Some cities began implementing quarantine measures, isolating ships or travelers for weeks before allowing them to enter. Authorities attempted to clean streets, remove waste, and limit contact between the sick and healthy. While these efforts were crude and often ineffective, they marked early steps toward organized public health and disease control. Culturally, the Black Death left deep psychological scars on Europe. Death became a constant presence, shaping how people viewed life and the world around them. Art and literature reflected this new reality, focusing heavily on mortality, decay, and the fragility of existence. The dance macabre, or dance of death, became a popular theme, depicting skeletons leading people of all social classes to the grave, emphasizing that death spared no one. At the same time, the trauma of the plague changed attitudes toward life. With death so close, many survivors sought pleasure, wealth, and meaning in the present moment. This shift in mindset encouraged individualism and curiosity about the natural world. Over time, these attitudes contributed to the intellectual awakening that would later become the Renaissance. The economic consequences of the Black Death were far-reaching. With fewer people to work the land, agricultural production declined, leading to higher food prices in some areas. However, survivors often enjoyed improved living standards as land and resources became more abundant. Wages rose, diets improved, and living conditions slowly changed. These shifts helped create a more dynamic and flexible economy. Politically, the plague weakened traditional power structures. Monarchs and nobles struggled to maintain control as populations declined and social unrest increased. Peasant revolts became more common, driven by rising expectations and resistance to oppressive wars. Governments were forced to adapt to a changing society, laying groundwork for stronger centralized states in the centuries that followed. The Black Death also influenced Europe's relationship with science and observation. While true scientific understanding would not emerge until much later, the failure of old explanations encouraged skepticism and inquiry. People began to question authority and tradition, valuing first-hand observation over accepted beliefs. This intellectual shift played a crucial role in the eventual development of modern science. By the late 14th century, the worst of the Black Death had passed, but the disease never truly disappeared. Plague outbreaks continued to return for centuries, reminding Europeans of their vulnerability. However, society had changed. Europe emerged from the catastrophe, transformed, economically stronger in some ways, socially more flexible, and intellectually more open to change. In the long run, the Black Death helped bring the Middle Ages to an end. The decline of feudalism, weakening of the Church's authority, rise of the middle class, and renewed focus on human potential all contributed to Europe's transition into the early modern period. Though born from unimaginable suffering, the plague forced Europe to evolve. The legacy of the Black Death is a reminder of how deeply a single event can alter the course of history. It reshaped Europe's population, economy, beliefs, and worldview, setting the stage for the Renaissance and the modern age. While it remains one of humanity's darkest chapters, the Black Death ultimately transformed Europe forever, leaving lessons about resilience, adaptation, and the fragile balance of human civilization.